For this HI-TEC 2021 presentation, I'll be discussing cyber supply chain risk management, threats, and mitigation strategies. This video was brought to you by the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center out of Whatcom Community College. NCyTE Center and this material is based upon work supported by the National Science Foundation. My name is Philip Kreger. I'm a professor of cybersecurity at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida, and I'm also a co-principal investigator for NCyTE. So as an overview of what we'll be discussing, first we'll talk about what a supply chain is, the phases of the supply chain, why and where the supply chain is susceptible to malign actors, the concept of cyber supply chain risk management, current and emergent laws and regulations regarding cyber supply chain risk management, and finally we'll discuss educational resources provided by NCyTE on their YouTube channel. We'll begin by discussing the Maersk incident, which is a prime example of a supply chain attack. Maersk is the world's largest container shipping company with more than 800 seafaring vessels, accounting for a fifth of the entire world's shipping capacity. In June 2017, a single internet-connected computer residing on Maersk network became infected with a type of malware called ransomware. The ransomware spread quickly across Maersk's global IT infrastructure, encrypting hard drives across 170 Maersk global offices, forcing recovery efforts to the entire IT infrastructure, including reinstalling software and files on over 4,000 servers, 45,000 personal computers, and 2,500 applications over a 10-day period. The ransomware attack resulted in the incapacitation of the Maersk's IT infrastructure, as almost all office computers were inoperable, disrupting the company's ability to accept shipping orders, but also stranding millions of tons of freight in transit. Port terminals in the United States, India, Spain, and the Netherlands, all run by Maersk, experienced massive disruptions. Even when the container ships were able to dock at a port, the thousands of semi-trailer trucks that pick up and distribute cargo were unable to collect it, as there was no way of knowing which containers were on the ships or the cargo that was inside. Losses were conservatively estimated at $10 billion. But this not only affected Maersk, it also affected other companies, developers, suppliers, and customers. The Maersk incident was a prime example of what is called a cyber supply chain attack. So what is a supply chain? A supply chain is a network between a company and its suppliers to produce and distribute a specific product to the final buyer. This network includes the different activities, people, entities, information, and resources. The supply chain also represents the steps it takes to get the product or service from its original state to the customer. So the world's economy is relying more and more on advanced hardware and software, or what is commonly called information communication technologies. These products include things like computers, networks, smartphones, but also Internet of Things devices such as security cameras, game boxes, smartwatches, Wi-Fi access points, smart refrigerators, smart thermostats, smart washers and dryers. But these involve not only consumer products, but also things like automobiles, ships, aircraft, trains, helicopters, and subways. All of these now rely on information communication technologies, computer chips, and networks. ICT products are built on hardware containing hundreds or thousands of physical components and sometimes millions of lines of code, and many of these components are commercial off-the-shelf products. The physical components and software that drive these products are typically sourced from a variety of sources. The globalization of the marketplace means that these components and software can be sourced from dozens or hundreds of companies throughout the world. The question we have to ask is, are these physical components, the thousands or hundreds of thousands of components, or the millions of lines of code, are they cyber secure? Another question, have the products been designed and tested to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability, three properties that we want to protect for our data and our information? These current and emergent technologies are composed of significantly more diverse, complex, and commercially available hardware components and software than any time in history. The supply chain for these technologies may involve sourcing from a hierarchy of suppliers, from prime contractors to Tier 1, 2, 3, and Tier 4 subcontractors that provide these hardware components and software, and services to upstream and downstream suppliers within the supply chain. Even lower tier suppliers, often small and medium-sized businesses, are reliant on the global supply chain network. If these products contain components and software that are sourced from multiple, changing, and diverse suppliers, how can we be sure that they are secure? Now let's look at the phases of the supply chain and where supply chain attacks can occur. The first phase is the requirements phase, followed by the design phase, the development and manufacturing phase, the testing phase, distribution, use and maintenance, and finally disposal. Supply chain attacks can occur at any of the aforementioned phases. Let's take a look at an example of an actual supply chain attack during the development and manufacturing phase. As reported by Bloomberg Businessweek, a Chinese military unit designed and manufactured microchips as small as a sharpened pencil tip. Some of these chips were built to look like signal conditioning couplers, and they incorporated memory, networking capability, and sufficient processing power for an attack. The microchips were inserted at Chinese factories that supplied Supermicro, one of the world's biggest sellers of server motherboards. The compromised motherboards were built into servers that were assembled by Supermicro. The sabotaged servers made their way inside data centers operated by dozens of companies. When a server was installed and switched on, the microchip altered the operating system's core so that it could accept modifications. The chip could also contact computers controlled by attackers in search of further instructions and code. And Businessweek had a simulation of exactly what this chip looked like. As you can see there in the circle, that's exactly the size of the chip. It's smaller than a tip of a pencil. And as we continue adding all of the thousands of components on the motherboard, it becomes invisible. The chip essentially created a back door to the server, allowing malign actors to connect to it and alter or capture information. Therefore, malign actors didn't have to hack into the systems, they were provided a built-in back door to the system. Who was affected by this? Apple, Amazon, the Central Intelligence Agency with their drone operations, and also Navy warships. And just as a disclaimer, although the government conducted testing of the motherboards and Bloomberg's report was based on a year-and-a-half study from dozens of sources, several companies, including Supermicro, denied the claims. Bloomberg stands by their report, and Apple no longer uses Supermicro boards, according to the report. So how can we mitigate potential cyber threats to the supply chain? This is accomplished through something called risk management. What is risk management? Risk management is the ongoing process of identifying, assessing, and responding to risk. To manage risk, organizations should understand the likelihood that an event will occur and the potential resulting impacts. With this information, organizations can determine the acceptable level of risk for achieving their organizational objectives and can express this as their risk tolerance. Now, while companies can create their own rules and regulations for risk management, the U.S. government has also implemented regulations and guidelines to mitigate supply chain attacks. One of the most important regulations comes from the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, also called DFARS. And DFARS contains requirements for federal contractors wishing to do business with the government. Businesses must meet these requirements, that is, be in compliance in order to bid. These include adequate security for unclassified information. In subclause 2A, you will see that it references the National Institutes of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-171, and the clause indicates that the contractor shall implement that as soon as practical, which leads us to NIST Special Publication 800-171 Revision 2, Protecting Controlled Unclassified Information in Non-Federal Systems and Organizations. NIST 800-171 provides agencies with recommended security requirements for protecting the confidentiality of controlled unclassified information when the information is resident. The requirements apply to all components of non-federal systems and organizations that process, store, and/or transmit that data, or that provide protection for such components in non-federal systems and organizations. In 800-171 includes 14 security families that range from access control, awareness and training, audit and accountability, all the way through risk assessment, security assessment, and system and information integrity. And within each of those security families, one will find more basic security requirements outlined in detail. An additional set of standards and regulations comes again from the National Institute of Standards and Technology through their Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity, also known as the Framework. The Framework is a prioritized, flexible, repeatable, performance-based, and cost-effective approach, including information security measures and controls that may be voluntarily adopted by owners and operators of critical infrastructure to help them identify, assess, and manage cyber risks. The framework focuses on using business drivers to guide cybersecurity activities and considering cybersecurity risks as part of the organization's risk management process. The framework can be used by organizations in any sector or community. It enables organizations, regardless of size, degree of cybersecurity risk, or cybersecurity sophistication, to apply the principles and best practices of risk management to improving security and resilience. And you'll note that the framework has a specific category for supply chain risk management. Now the question arises is, why do we need so many regulations and guidelines? And there's multiple answers to that question. The first is supply chains existed long before cyber became a problem or even became into existence. And as such, cybersecurity has been seen as an add-on. A secondary factor, and probably most important, is that the verification of compliance with the regulations and guidelines that I mentioned previously, has been based upon self-verification or self-attestation. That essentially means that if the organization says they're in compliance, then they're deemed in compliance by the federal government. However, the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. government still see that there's weaknesses in compliance with these rules and regulations. And in testimony before the House Armed Services Committee, the Department of Defense joint testimony indicated that to elevate the private sector's focus on security, the department has established a Deliver Uncompromised initiative focused on industry delivery of capabilities, services, technologies, and weapon systems that are uncompromised by our malign actors from cradle to grave. It aims to establish security as a fourth pillar in acquisition, on par with cost, schedule, and performance, and to create incentives for industry to embrace security not as a cost center, but as a key differentiator. Which leads us to an emergent set of regulations called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. Version 1 was published in January 30th, 2020. And the CMMC recognizes that while compliance with DFARS is mandatory, as is compliance with NIST Special Publication 800-171, in most cases, compliance with these regulations is based on the honor system. The challenge with the honor system is that companies tend to be overly optimistic when asked about whether they are compliant. The CMMC is a unified standard for implementing cybersecurity across the defense industrial base, and that includes over 300,000 companies. Previously, contractors were responsible for implementing, monitoring, and certifying the security of their information technology systems and any sensitive DoD information stored on or transmitted by those systems. CMMC will change all that. Now, contractors are responsible for implementing cybersecurity requirements, but now third-party assessments of contractors' compliance with certain mandatory practices is required. CMMC is a unified cybersecurity standard for future DoD acquisitions, and if you'll note on the screen that there are 17 capability domains, and many of those came from previous regulations and guidelines discussed in this video. So Model 1.0 that was published in January of 2020 encompasses the 17 capability domains with 43 specific capabilities, 5 processes across 5 levels that measure process maturity, as you see on the right of the screen, and overall 171 practices across 5 levels to measure technical capabilities. In summary, we've discussed the fact that ICT products are increasingly composed of commercial off-the-shelf products, parts, services, hardware, and software. Supply chains themselves are increasingly complex, dynamic, and unpredictable. Existing guidelines have relied on self-verification, which has been somewhat problematic. However, the emergent guideline of the CMMC will require more rigor by using third-party assessors or testers. Now I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about NCyTE's YouTube channel. So the channel hosts educational content targeting high school and community college students and educators. The videos can be used by educators to enhance their core IT or core cyber curriculum. And we've got several categories of content that have been developed and are in development. And these include National Airspace System Cybersecurity or Aviation Cybersecurity, Maritime Cybersecurity, Cyber Supply Chain Risk Management, Small Unmanned Aircraft Systems, that is SUAS, or Drone Cybersecurity, and in the future we'll have Election Cybersecurity and Healthcare Cybersecurity. Each of the content video series are comprised of 3 videos, with the first video being a non-technical introduction to the domain content, which should be understandable by a general audience that has no technical background. And the remaining videos, 2 and 3 in the series, target students in IT or cyber programs that have a little more technical knowledge. Additionally, there is a new series called Securing Your Digital Life. This series contains videos that describe how cyber threats and cybersecurity pertain to the technology commonly used by students, such as smartphones, laptops, iPads, the internet, and the World Wide Web. And content includes things such as, what are social engineering attacks? How do I identify social engineering attacks, and how do I protect myself? What is a firewall? Why is it important? What are backups? Why are they important? What are password managers, and why are they important? Additional video series will continue to be created throughout the year and posted on the NCyTE YouTube channel. This video was brought to you by the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center out of Whatcom Community College.